Oppose the idea we're racking up even more deficit and debt, which we both acknowledge is a serious problem in our country and bound to get worse. They oppose making a bad problem even worse. And why? For what higher noble purpose? To give tax cuts that mostly benefit the top 1% of Americans. This is going to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, votes in each and every one of our careers. I am proud to be here doing everything I possibly can to say, hell no, let's kill this bill. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boyle. Chairman Thompson, you're recognized.
Well, thank you,
In each
Chairwoman
and every
Fox,
one of our
Member
careers.
McGovern, and members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today concerning the agriculture title of the One Big Beautiful Bill. I'm proud of our product. We're delivering $120 billion in net deficit reduction while delivering a generational investment in the farm economy, giving farmers the tools to expand international markets, and ensuring that top-tier agricultural research can be conducted here instead of China. We saved close to $200 billion from the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, by making necessary changes to restore integrity to the program and preserve its ability to serve the most vulnerable long into the future. These represent the largest and most significant reforms made to SNAP in the history of the program. This bill ensures SNAP works the way Congress intended it to, by reinforcing work, rooting out waste, and instituting long overdue accountability incentives to control costs and end administrative overreach. This program is in dire need of reform. Since just 2019, SNAP costs have skyrocketed from $60 billion to $110 billion annually, an 83% increase, while enrollment has grown from 36 million to 42 million. And in 2024, over $10 billion in erroneous SNAP payments were sent out. That's disgraceful, not only to the taxpayer, but also the SNAP recipient. The agriculture title of the bill includes several improvements to the SNAP program, including preventing future administrations from unilaterally increasing SNAP benefits beyond inflation, focusing on a core principle that everyone receiving the benefit that can work should work, and modernizing the work requirement and closing loopholes that allow for widespread waivers. Closing various loopholes that states exploit, such as gaming the system to artificially increase SNAP benefits, and creating incentives to ensure states run the program more effectively and more efficiently. SNAP is the only federally funded state-administered entitlement program where the state has zero skin in the game on the benefit. It's human nature to be more careful when you're spending your own money than when you're spending others. And that's why we put forward a cost-share structure that requires states with high error rates to pay a portion of the SNAP benefit beginning in fiscal year 2028. In addition to the most significant reforms to SNAP in history, our committee was able to deliver a historic investment in the farm safety net and infuse critical investments into rural America. It's imperative for Congress to rebuild the safety net, the farm safety net. These much-needed changes mitigate further unbudgeted ad hoc spending and prevent a full-blown financial crisis in farm country that could devastate the food and ag supply chain, let alone the economy. Finally, on the investment front, we take care of a few other important items like investment in trade promotion, animal disease preparedness, specialty crops, dairy, research, and some programs that currently are without standing baseline. In closing, I'm proud to deliver a historic amount of savings to the taxpayer and to do so in a way that will ultimately have positive outcomes for low-income individuals who get back into the workforce while also standing by our farmers, our ranchers, and our rural communities. This is a win-win. I have great respect for the chairwoman, the ranking member, and the members of this committee, and I thank you once again for the opportunity to come before you today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Ranking Member Craig, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. The more the American people learn about this big, ugly bill, and it's nearly $200 billion in cuts to food assistance, the less they like it. I honestly don't know how a single one of my colleagues could vote for this bill. 17 million Americans lose their health insurance or lose their health care. Millions and millions of people across our country are going to lose access to food assistance. You know, most Americans don't even know this yet in our country, but I promise you they will. A recent Fox News poll found that 59% of voters oppose this bill. The American people are not buying what the Republicans are selling, even on Fox News. The American people, like House Democrats, want to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. This bill doesn't reduce waste, fraud, or abuse. It gives government-sponsored tax breaks to the wealthiest among us, and you pay for it by taking food and health care away from seniors, children, veterans, and people with disabilities. And it isn't even paid for. It adds nearly $4 trillion to the national debt. So much for fiscal responsibility here. The American people, including Minnesotans, know the cost of living is too high. This bill does not lower the cost of living. It makes meeting the basic needs like groceries and accessing medical care more expensive. I promise you this bill will raise health care costs for everyone. The American people want efficient and effective governance. This bill doesn't do anything to improve good governance. It makes it worse by pushing billions in new expenses onto state and county governments, forcing our state and local governments into a position where they have to decide between taking food away from their friends and neighbors or slashing other local services or raising taxes. And I mean that in 10 states across this country. Folks are going to have to look at raising county taxes in order to pay for the administration and perhaps even the benefit of cutting food assistance. In Minnesota alone, where the burden for SNAP cuts will fall to the counties, the Association of Minnesota Counties projects they'll have to raise property taxes by an average of more than 5% to pay for it, and by even more in some counties. Many of you sitting here today do not even know the effect that this bill will have on your counties. Republicans have managed to do almost the impossible. Miraculously, you've created a bill that takes food and health care away from millions of Americans in a way that does not save taxpayer dollars, but instead adds trillions of dollars to the national debt. Minnesotans and Americans in every corner of this country are asking, how is any of this actually possible? It's simple. You've picked tax breaks for large corporations and ultra-wealthy people in our country over hardworking families. Republicans are selling the American people down the river. This bill sells out our farmers and the families they feed. Of course, we need all the elements of a farm bill. Mr. Chairman talked about the elements in this bill. We should be doing this in a farm bill, a full 5-year farm bill with 12 bipartisan titles. It sells out the hopes and dreams of millions of Americans struggling to keep food on the table. It sells out more than 300 rural hospitals that are at risk of closing due to Medicaid cuts. It also cuts hundreds of billions of dollars from SNAP, our most effective anti-hunger program, by taking $6 a day out of the pockets of vulnerable seniors, veterans, children, and people with disabilities, and putting that money back into the pockets of billionaires. Taking food away from the people who need it forces seniors to choose between having a meal and paying for medicine. And let me just say this, because we were in committee for over 20 hours, and over I heard my Republican colleagues talking about that this activity would not cut access to veterans' nutrition benefits. This is exactly what the Senate version does, and many of you don't even know what this version says. We had 1 hour to come into this room. Many veterans, as we know, suffer from behavioral or physical health issues connected to their service. 1 in 3 working-age veterans with disabilities aren't sure where their next meal will come from. 1 in 4 working-age veterans who can't find work are food insecure. Our veterans can't pay for meals with Support the Troops bumper stickers, and they can't eat thoughts and prayers. And it doesn't stop there. This bill takes food away from former foster youth, leaving the foster care system, who may not have the same level of support from families that many of us benefited from when we were just starting to make our way in the world as 18 or 19-year-olds. I just don't understand where these values are coming from. The American people are right not to trust this bill. The bill doesn't save us a cent. It adds to the debt. If passed, it will pass millions and millions along to the nation. This bill was a disgrace when it left this chamber. Most of you haven't read it to know that it's even more of a disgrace now that it's back. And folks, this is one of the worst mistakes anyone who votes yes for will make in your political career. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Craig. Chairman Guthrie, you're recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. Thank you for holding this hearing today. And the One Big Beautiful Bill Act cuts wasteful spending, defends our nation's energy dominance, supports the rapid innovation of American industry, and preserves and protects Medicaid for the Americans who are most in need. We will send a bill to President's desk that delivers on Americans' leadership across industries, spurs technological innovation, and supports individual workers. We will unleash American energy dominance through strategic investments while also putting an end to wasteful subsidies. We will spur technological innovation by renewing American wireless leadership through Spectrum Auction Authority that protects national security. This legislation begins to refill our dangerously low strategic petroleum reserve and creates new investments to generate reliable energy that will secure our grid and power AI. This bill also raises $85 billion of new revenue through a historic agreement reauthorizing the FCC Spectrum Authority while protecting U.S. national security. Our priority has been to strengthen, secure, and sustain Medicaid for expectant mothers, children, people with disability, and elderly. Our legislation stops billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse in the Medicaid program by beginning to close loopholes, ensuring states have the flexibility to remove ineligible recipients from their rolls and removing beneficiaries who are enrolled in multiple states. H.R. 1 ends coverage for deceased beneficiaries, limits the ability of enrollees to obtain duplicative coverage, and ensures individuals with million-dollar homes are no longer eligible to qualify for Medicaid coverage. These are all common-sense policies that will return taxpayer dollars to middle-class Americans and families. Republicans seek to return the core intent of the Medicaid program, which was created to protect health care for Americans who otherwise could not support themselves. Democrats expanded the program far beyond this core mission, allowing spending to grow into trillions if not addressed. Our common sense work requirements and community engagement policies for able-bodied adults who choose not to work encourage individuals to re-enter the workforce and regain their independence. This provision speaks to Republicans' commitment to strengthening Medicaid to ensure it is available for those who need it most, and this is an issue that resonates favorably with the majority of Americans across the board. H.R. 1 fulfills President Trump's promise of generational growth, prosperity, and health for the American people. It fulfills our commitment to lowering taxes for working families, unleashes American energy, and safeguards Medicaid for patients that need it the most, and supports the rapid innovation of American technology. It's time to pass this vital legislation and see it signed into law. And thank you, and I will yield back.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Pallone, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I respect you a lot, but when I heard you in the beginning talk about Democrats fear-mongering, I just want to assure you that when I went home on Friday and this short weekend that we had, I was not fear-mongering, and I was actually shocked because I live in my district. A lot of it is at the Jersey Shore. You know, it's almost July 4th. People were out at the beach in their bathing suits, having a good time. I thought, oh, I'm not going to hear much about this bill. But in reality, it was the opposite. I couldn't go anywhere without people talking to me about this bill. First day, Friday, I found out that the county commissioners in my home county, which is a Republican county, consistently votes Republican, had passed a resolution unanimously opposing the bill, all Republicans. Then I went to church, I guess, on Sunday. It was a church, I have to be honest with you, that is, most of the people there are Republican. There aren't too many Democrats in the church. And literally some of the trustees came up to me and said, I'm so glad that you're voting against this bill. Please continue the fight against it. I went to a concert. This wasn't a rock concert. This was the Ocean Grove Camp Meeting Association. Maybe the name will give you an idea. Methodist Camp Meeting Association. And it was a classical concert. I couldn't even get out of the room without the hall without people coming up to me and saying, this is a terrible bill. I hope you can stop it. Then I also met with the governor over the weekend because on Monday, our state adopted the state budget. It was about $57 billion state budget. And he and the health commissioner said to me that we're not going to be able to deal with this. We don't know what's going to happen. They estimate about $3.5 billion cut for the state of New Jersey out of a budget next year that, as I said, was just adopted Monday, $57 billion. What is that, about 6%? They don't think we can survive. So, in all honesty, you said, well, we're fear-mongering, we're, same as doomsday, destroying the healthcare system. But that's what people are saying to us. That's not what we're saying to them. That's what they're saying to us, because they realize that hospitals will close. They'll realize the shortfall in funding for nursing homes. They realize that the deficit spending not only is going to lead to sequestration of Medicare by 4% across the board, but that it's going to hurt the economy, and the economy could actually go into recession because of the level of deficit. So I just want to assure you, this is what Democrats are hearing from our constituents. It's not what we're necessarily saying, it's what they're saying to us. Now, the other thing I want to stress is that, look, the reality is that every time this bill moves forward, more and more people lose their health insurance. I think when it was before our committee, the CBO figures, Mr. Chairman, were like 13.5 million people would lose their health insurance. Then when it passed the floor, it was like 14, 15. Now the CBO is saying that the Senate bill is almost 17 million people that will lose their health insurance. So it becomes crueler. I don't want to say ugly. I'm going to say cruel, more cruel, as we proceed. And I don't know, whether we read the bill or not. This is what whether you read the bill or not. The CBO is saying that we're talking now about almost 17 million Americans that are going to lose their health insurance. And what does that mean? It basically means that the hospitals, the nursing homes, community health centers are not going to get the third-party payment that comes from people who have health insurance. And so much of this is now uncompensated care, which means people will go to the emergency room at the hospital, they can't afford to pay it, and it becomes uncompensated care. And then the hospital, what do? They either raise prices, which means that insurance premiums and co-pays go up for people that have insurance. We still know the majority of Americans get health insurance for their job. So those policies are going to be more expensive. The co-pays are going to be more expensive. And all these people that don't have insurance are going to go to the emergency room and they don't get care. They don't see a doctor on a regular basis. They get sicker. And the consequences of the healthcare system really are devastating. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, too, is that one of the things that got significantly worse in the Senate bill is the provider tax. In other words, in the House bill, it was bad enough that the level of direct payments that states could make to failing hospitals or nursing homes was cut. But now it's made even worse in the Senate bill. The provider tax limitations in the House bill made it so that whatever your provider tax revenue was, it couldn't grow, right, or it couldn't change. But what they did in the Senate is to basically cut back on it. So over the next few years, the amount of money that states can raise through provider tax actually decreases. It's not the status quo, it decreases. And that means because of what happens with that provider tax and going back to the hospitals and nursing homes, that they're going to have even less money to deal with and more likely to close, more likely to have cutbacks in services. So, look, in my opinion, this is an extreme bill, and it's not about waste, fraud, and abuse. It's not about whether you work or not. Instead, the Republicans are taking away health care from some of the poorest Americans so they can give these big tax breaks to the billionaires, to the large corporations, and they're putting all kinds of paperwork, burdensome paperwork, time-consuming roadblocks in the way people who are trying to get by, people who are working, or people who can't work because they're disabled. And now all these barriers are being put in the way of their being able to get Medicaid or the ACA. If you're not eligible for Medicaid because of these roadblocks, then you're also not eligible for the ACA because of these same roadblocks. Now, let me just talk a little bit beyond healthcare, because we're mostly talking about healthcare and SNAP today, but our committee, as you know, deals with a lot of other things. So I think I need to also stress before I conclude that this bill is going to raise energy costs. It's going to prioritize corporate polluters over people. It's going to undermine our efforts to fight the climate crisis, which people care about as well. When we passed the Inflation Reduction Act 3 years ago, Congress took a massive step forward towards lowering energy bills for American families. However, that progress is reversed in this bill by rescinding a lot of those programs that were lowering energy costs and helping to build clean energy manufacturing here in the United States. It's a disaster for the environment. I know I'm using these tough words, Madam Chair, but I have to. It's a disaster for the environment because it guts critical environmental protections and programs that were in the IRA. It rescinds the unobligated funds for virtually every Environmental Protection Agency program that was put into the Inflation Reduction Act. It repeals the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It also undermines the landmark methane reduction bill and the fee that holds polluters accountable, and just gives another leg up to the fossil fuel industry while eliminating clean energy initiatives. I believe in all the above. I believe we need new fossil fuels, we need nuclear, we need clean energy. What you're doing in this bill is eliminating the clean energy portion and saying that the rest is okay. But that's not the way it works. We need to move forward with clean energy as well. And then the last thing, I think, because my chairman mentioned it, about Spectrum. He was very proud of, I think, from what you said about the Spectrum. But the bottom line is you're taking $80 million from a Spectrum auction, which traditionally we have used to help, expand options for the public. Like we funded grants with Spectrum for Next Generation 9/11, or to make high-speed internet more affordable for American families. That's what Spectrum auction should be used for. It shouldn't be used to give tax cuts for billionaires and large corporations. So I know I've heard you guys say this is the big, beautiful bill. I've heard our guys say this is the big, ugly bill. I think it's a big, cruel bill, because American families are really going to suffer, and they shouldn't have to suffer in the ways that I described today. We should be trying to help them with affordability, with making their lives better. This bill is going to be the opposite. So it's really the big, cruel bill, in my opinion, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. Chairman Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Fox and Ranking Member McGovern, for this opportunity to testify on how the one big, beautiful bill is delivering on historic tax relief for blue-collar workers, middle-class families, farmers, and small businesses. We're at the point now that both the House and the Senate have had their voices heard. And while some of the bill has changed, its promises have not. We are delivering an American economy that prioritizes the working class and the families that make up the heart of this great nation. We embrace policies that were cheered by the small businesses, the farmers, the moms and dads that appeared before the Ways and Means Committee in field hearings and in tax team meetings throughout the country over the course of more than 2 years. In fact, we visited more than 30 different states to hear to those small business owners, those working moms, those farmers. This disproves the Democrats' claim that this bill is rushed and was created behind closed doors. The American people know exactly what is in this bill. 77 million Americans voted for this bill. We should do the same. Democrats used one-party control of Washington to supercharge the IRS with more middle-class audits and more reporting requirements for gig workers and small businesses. They spent over $600 billion on handouts to the wealthy, well-connected, and the political class. The Republicans' one big, beautiful bill not only ends Democrats' lavish the lavish green handouts and stops the threat of a $1,700 tax increase on working families. But because of a bigger child tax credit and increased standard deduction, Americans will get an immediate tax cut compared to what they would pay today. Households earning less than $100,000 get a 12% tax cut compared to what they are paying right now. Wealthy Americans will pay a greater share of the tax burden than they do now, just as what happened after the 2017 tax cuts. Democrats want to tell a different story, but simple math shows who pays more taxes under this bill. With the One Big Beautiful Bill, we will protect or create more than 7 million jobs. Small businesses alone are projected to create 1 million new jobs annually. Democrats' spending fueled price hikes. Republicans' tax cuts will boost pay raises. Under Democrats, American families experienced rampant inflation caused by President Biden's lavish spending. Under these Republican tax cuts, a typical family of four will see their take-home pay increase by upwards of nearly $11,000 per year. Real wages for workers will rise by as much as $7,200 per year. We go even farther by including President Trump's promises of no tax on tips, no tax on overtime pay, and no tax on auto loan interest of autos made in the United States, and tax relief for seniors. The waitress making her living on tips gets an extra $1,300 in her pocket because of this bill. The lineman working overtime to restore power after a natural disaster gets an extra $1,400 because of this bill. 40 million American families will see a permanent increase in the child tax credit to $2,200. For the 91% of Americans who use the standard deduction to file their taxes, they will see a permanent increase of up to $31,500. Democrats want Washington to tell families what to do. Republicans believe parents know what works for them. For education, we give parents and students more opportunity to choose schooling that best fits their needs, including trade schools, by expanding 529 education savings accounts. For family growth and health, we enhance the adoption tax credit, make permanent the paid leave tax credit. We increase the child and dependent care credit, as well as flexible spending arrangements, and we expand health savings accounts. For our children's future, Trump accounts put children on a financially secure footing, pegged to America's economic success. Under Democrats, families could barely get by. Under Republicans, One Big Beautiful Bill, families will thrive. This is a historic opportunity to build on the successes of the 2017 Trump tax cuts and provide additional relief for workers, families, farmers, and small businesses. More investment, more growth, and more jobs right here in America. In fact, even before this bill's passage, policies contained within it have already notched huge victories. With the recently announced G7 Global Tax Framework and Canada ending its unfair digital service tax, the G7 agreement alone will stop foreign governments from stealing upwards to $120 billion of revenues from our country's coffers. That's a huge, huge win, Madam Chair. We are prepared to get pro-worker, pro-family, and pro-America tax relief to the president's desk so families and Main Street businesses can start planning their own futures as soon as possible. I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Representative Moore, my classmate,
Thank
you
you.
are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. I'm a little congested here today, so it won't be possible for me to be my loud self. But you know, I'm really glad to be the last one to speak on this distinguished panel, because I think that you've heard two different arguments here. On one hand, you hear about people getting $11,000 more tax breaks at the lower end of the income spectrum. You know, it's all these benefits. And on the other hand, you've heard members talk about the draconian cuts and the impact that it'll have on hospitals and on poor people. So whose report do you believe? And I think that this is the conundrum for the American people. Well, given in my own faith tradition, I look toward Matthew 7:16, which says, by their deeds, you will know them. And no matter what, I know many of us have been here for many years, Madam Chair, more years than you and I have been here. And people have already decided what their legacy in this place will be. But no matter what you think your legacy was, today will seal your legacy. Your legacy will be sealed in the next 36 hours by virtue of how you vote on this bill. And I think that the American people are now seeing the soul of the formerly grand old party. This Republican Party is nothing like the GOP. You know, the Committee on Ways and Means was asked to increase the U.S. debt by trillions of dollars. And boy, did we meet that mark with this bill. We done good with regard to meeting that market. And what did the American people buy with the $4 trillion in debt? Massive tax goodies for billionaires at the cost of 17 million Americans losing health care coverage and more hungry school children. By their deeds, you will know them. This is the moment for all of us to stand on the shores of the Rubicon, where you can never go back on your legacy. As Senator Tillis from the great state of North Carolina, he has decided that he cannot go back, whatever happens in North Carolina, that he would rather resign than to go back on his values as a human being. So as we once again consider the billionaires' bonanza bill, which of course the Senate made worse. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but they did. The Republican senators found a way to provide more debt, more lost health coverage, and stifling clean, renewable energy of the future. You know, our nation's founding fathers entrusted this House of Representatives to tax and spend. They felt that the House would act more responsibly with this awesome power because we are responsive to the people. And yet, this legislation is nothing short of a total betrayal of the founding fathers' faith in this body. You know, I take particular, and I'm representing the Ways and Means Committee, we take particular offense at the characterization of millions of citizens as cheats, fraudsters, and wastes in order to justify the cuts. The dehumanization of people has been extraordinary in order to create the narrative. because this bill, in fact, will make this country sicker, less educated, hungrier, and deeper in debt. And for what? So that billionaires and corporations can have more and more and more. By their deeds, Madam Chair, you shall know them. Back in May, when we went through the paces on this bill, we had a bill that handed out billions and billions of dollars to millionaires. In fact, when we looked at this bill, on average, a person making over $1 million got a tax cut of $81,500. The bill in front of us, sent back by the Senate, has an average tax cut for a person making over $1 million at $96,000. That's right. The United States Senate took our House bill and said $81,000 in tax cuts just isn't enough for millionaires. We got to give them even more tax cuts. Now, let's check in on the average Americans who are teaching our children and building our roads in Milwaukee and Greensboro and New Brownsville and Rock Hill or Bloomington. In May, we learned that on an average, a household that makes under $50,000 got a tax cut of just 73 cents per day. That was about $247. Spend it wisely, America, because it's going to cost you your health care and your child's education. By their deeds, you will know them. And by the deeds of the United States Senate, we saw that we provided even more and more and more to millionaires and billionaires. The Senate saw that 73 cents a day that we were providing the average American was just too much. So they clawed back a nickel. That's right. If you made under $50,000 on average, you were getting 68 cents a day. That's not even enough to buy a Snickers. And that's what the Senate did. They took away the 73 cents a day and made it 68 cents a day. By their deeds, you shall know them, American people. When we were here in May, we learned that in just 2027 alone, the top 1/10%, not 1%, 1/10%, the richest of the rich, that is people making over $2 million a year, the people who we are told pay the most taxes, well, they got $50 billion in tax cuts just in 2027. $50 billion with the capital B. That was a House bill. But you know what? That $50 billion just wasn't enough for the Senate. They thought that because they objected to it not making enough cuts, so they decided to squeeze more and more and more from the old, infirm, and children. So they moved that number to $60 billion that they gave tax cuts to. That's right. In 2027 alone, the top 1/10% got $60 billion in tax cuts. Now, imagine the need in this country for better schools, child care, and job training. Imagine the needs we could address with the money. Nope. Republicans want to give a stimulus boost to the super yacht market. Madam Chair, back in May when we were here, I expressed my deep sadness that in order to, quote unquote, pay for these tax cuts, Republicans were kicking millions of the most vulnerable Americans off health care. Well, you heard it here from this panel. The Senate upped that number to 17 million people. What will we do? What will the Americans in nursing homes do when that money is moved from health care to the banks of the wealthy? Put them into the streets and hope for the best? Maybe they can get online and do a GoFundMe for all their health care needs. By their deeds, you will know them. Finally, Madam Chair, when we were here last May, we had a bill that the CBO said would blow up the deficit by $2.4 trillion. And when you add interest costs to that, you get $3 trillion. I know we have a lot of people among our Republican colleagues that don't like debt, but for some reason, they like this debt. And the Senate saw this, and they were thinking, gee, $3 trillion in debt, we can afford a little bit more debt. Why don't we just juice that number and make the debt number $4 trillion? Yep. So I don't know what it means to be a fiscal hawk, because if you vote for this bill, you're adding $4 trillion to the debt. You know, I know that Republicans have gone on TV for months and months and months, solemnly insisting to the American people that this bill is going to cut the debt, that this will not hurt anybody on Medicaid, just those lazy bums and you know, unworthy people. They've given us fantastical growth projections coming out of the White House. They're going to look at revenue from tariffs that are going to save the country and generate all these savings. Well, by their deeds, you're going to know them. Maybe this is what the Senate was thinking when they said that trillions of dollars in tax debt, we don't know the exact number yet, but somewhere between $4 to $5 trillion in tax debt equals zero. I got 3 great-granddaughters. I don't know how in the world I'm going to teach them that math. So, Madam Chair, I'll close with this. I know that sometimes here we're prone to exaggerations. I've heard a lot of exaggerations here today about how, you know, people are going to get $7,200 more in income and all these tax breaks. I don't know, a lot of drama around here. But I'm not being dramatic when I say that this lipstick on the pig is the worst bill I've seen since I've been in Congress. Showering millions on millionaires and billionaires with tax cuts they don't need, sticking our grandkids with the tab, kicking 17 million people off health care, cutting the neediest off of SNAP benefits, cutting off our energy, clean energy future. The moral failings of this building are just too many to count. And yet, rather than step back and ask ourselves, is this really what we want to do? We're barreling toward an arbitrary deadline. And I'll tell you, the American people will not be celebrating on the 4th of July. They'll be looking at us, and when they ask me, what's the difference between Democrats and Republicans? I will refer them to H.R. 1, the Senate amendment to H.R. 1, and say, by their deeds, you will know them. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moore. Chairman Smith, Chairman Arrington, I've heard hyperbole before, but to say this is the most dangerous piece of legislation in modern history really is the beyond hyperbole, I believe. But we're hearing this constant refrain that this bill benefits no one and harms everyone. Can you expand on how this bill benefits low and middle income Americans? I'll start with you, Chairman Smith, and then come to you, Chairman Arrington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's first say, if you vote against this bill, you're voting against the child tax credit being at $2,200 per child. At the end of this year, it will drop to $1,000. That makes a huge impact to 40 million hardworking Americans. And it's simply, when they vote no, they're voting against a $2,200 child tax credit, and they're okay with $1,000. They're also voting against no taxes on tips. There's a lot of millionaires and billionaires that gets tips. No, there's not. But if you listen to the Democrats here, they said this is all about billionaires and millionaires. No tax on tips. No tax on overtime work. How many millionaires and billionaires, Madam Chair, works by the hour? I don't think there's one. So by saying that this bill is for the billionaires and millionaires, it's just completely false. because no taxes on overtime, no taxes on tips, tax relief for seniors. This affects real Americans. You have permanency for paid family and medical leave tax credit, helping workers balance family and careers. Partial refundability of the adoption tax credit. Numerous items could go on, but they'll try to say that this is all about the millionaires and billionaires. But let me tell you, in addition to stopping a $1,700 tax increase, we're stopping a $1,700 tax increase by passing this bill. Working families making between $15,000 to $30,000 will have their taxes cut by 21%, the largest of any income group in the distribution title. The largest. And that's a fact from CBO. As a result, the One Big Beautiful Bill, the top 1% will pay more in federal taxes. They did before TCJA, over 40% of all federal taxes. And so it's important to know that 66% of the One Big Beautiful Bill's tax cuts benefit American families making less than $500,000 a year. That's a tax cut for real Americans, and it counters the false narratives that we have heard this day.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Chairman Arrington.
Madam Chair, I agree with Chairman Smith. I can't imagine working families sustaining a tax hike after the inflation tax, which, as I mentioned, was 21%. These good people from everyone's district have suffered a cost of living crisis, the likes of which we haven't endured or experienced in 40 years. So I agree with Chairman Smith. I mean, let's start with do no harm. Let's not have a 22% hike on top of the 21% hike, which is thousands of dollars from these families' pocketbooks. But I think the best way to predict the future is past performance. And if you look at what happened after TCJA was passed, I would say, coupled with deregulation and other good economic policies, but we had the highest wage increase in a quarter of a century. $5,000 for the median household. The people on the lower end of the spectrum did better than those at the top in terms of the value of the tax cut. And wages grew 2 times as fast in the bottom 10% as the top 10%. The bottom 50 income grew. The bottom 50% of income earners grew 3 times that of the top 1%. And as the Chairman Smith said, the top 1% actually paid a greater share of their taxes. So, not to mention small businesses that support working families and family farms, and so the list goes on. But I would say for those lowest income earners and those that need the safety net, I think this helps them by not allowing illegal immigrants and folks who are otherwise ineligible from siphoning money off and jeopardizing the sustainability of these programs into the future. And in fact, Numbers USA says that it's $9,000 in social services, taxpayer funded, for people here illegally. That's more than we spend per American citizen on Medicaid. So to Ms. Moore, who's a friend, to her comment about we will be known by our deeds, how about the Democrats in the Senate, all except 4, who voted against the prohibition of illegal immigrants getting taxpayer-funded health care? When we can't sustain 51% increase over the last 4 or 5 years, 400 to 600 billion roughly on Medicaid, it will be $1 trillion in the next over this next budget window. It's not sustainable. So, Madam Chair, it couldn't be a better time or better policies to strengthen working families.
Thank you very much. Chairman Guthrie, out of all the fear-mongering we've heard, the most ridiculous is the claim that people will die if this bill is passed. The health care provisions in this bill target waste, fraud, and abuse in our Medicaid program to ensure it's sustainable for future generations and can continue to provide for our most vulnerable populations, such as women and children for whom the program was intended to serve. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I have questions for everybody. But before I do, I have a question for you, Madam Chair. I'm just reading some of the, this is a post from Andy Harris, who's our colleague, the head of the chair of the Freedom Caucus, has said that he will vote no on the rule when this rule comes before the full committee. He said that he'll vote no on the rule for the big, beautiful bill. He said that I don't think it's going to be in the next couple of days, but it's going to have to be a compromise between the House and the Senate, basically saying we're not there yet. I guess if the head of the Freedom Caucus is now publicly announcing he's against
Cut compared to what they
rule,
are paying.
then what the hell are we doing here? Because if you lose 3 or 4 members, then we're spinning our wheels here. So do you have any information on how many Republicans are going to vote no on the rule? Because I can assure you, every Democrat is voting no on the rule.
No, sir, and as you know, we are the Speaker's Committee, and it's our task to hold this hearing on the bill, and we'll continue until we're given directions that there is no chance that the rule or the bill will pass.
Okay, I just wanted my colleagues to know that, and I'll keep announcing as people on the Republican side announce that they're voting against the rule, because I think that's relevant information. But
Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
I just want to say for the record, I mean, Chairman Smith said that Democrats said that this bill is only for billionaires. That's absolutely not what I said in my opening remarks. And I'll say it again, it is this bill mostly benefits the well-off, but I said I would support, some of the tax relief in this bill. The bottom line is that I support extending the tax benefits for the middle class. Told you I supported tax relief for, on tips. And so I think we have some consensus there. Where there is disagreement, I think on the tax stuff, is the millionaires and billionaires. And I don't know whether you felt you were constrained for time in your opening testimony or not, but you didn't say anything about the benefits, why we're doing, why there's tax relief for millionaires and billionaires. So you might want to, I'm happy to give you the time now to explain why do we need tax relief for millionaires and billionaires, especially when people are worried about increasing the debt and, people losing health care and SNAP benefits, but this is going to cost us. So why does Jeff Bezos need a tax break?
Ranking Member McGovern, usually when you hear people say that we're cutting taxes for millionaires and billionaires, they point to Section 199A, which is the small business deduction. Almost 80% of all businesses in the United States are pass-through entities. And by making that permanent, that small business deduction, that is what helps create so many jobs. And that is where your side of the aisle continues to talk about the millionaires and billionaires. And the other section that you talk about is
Jeff Bezos not getting a tax break in this bill?
the other section that you all are talking about within tax cuts is that we're keeping existing tax rates as they are today, moving permanently. We're not reducing those tax rates, we're just keeping them the same. So the fact that we're keeping them the same, you're saying that we're giving Jeff Bezos a tax cut.
But he gets a tax cut in this bill. I mean, I'm looking at at some of the statistics here. According to the way I interpret this bill, the top 1% get 22% of the benefit, the top 5% get 43% of the benefit, the top 10% get 52% of the benefit, and the top 20% get 66% of the benefit. And I don't know about your district, but most small businesses in my district are multimillionaires or billionaires. And, you know, you mentioned the child tax credit in your opening. The child tax credit goes down next year because Republicans designed it that way. You made it temporary, but you made tax cuts for corporations permanent. So that's why we're dealing with that. You know, Republicans want to pretend that this bill provides meaningful tax relief to families through their child tax credit modifications. This is patently false. In fact, what Republicans are doing with the child tax credit in this bill is in many ways even worse than doing nothing at all. Under this backwards proposal, 1 in 3 children in America will be ineligible for the full child tax credit. That means millions of American citizen children will lose access to this life-changing assistance that they're currently receiving. In addition, families making more than $400,000 per year will be able to get the full value of the credit, but inexplicably, lower-income families will get nothing or just a fraction of that due to how Republicans structured the tax credit. So the official nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation estimated that next year, if this bill passes, 17 million American citizen children will be blocked from getting the full value of the credit. Now, Republicans claim that they want people to work, but that's just false, because this bill actually strips the child tax credit away from children whose parents do work, but just don't earn enough. So under your proposal, even if parents work full-time for an entire year, they'll earn too little to get the full credit if they're paid minimum wage. And again, this is all happening while some of us are astonished by the way that the tax benefits seem to go toward those at the top. And the people who are, this is not just me or Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee expressing concern about that. I mean, the Children's Hospital Association put out a statement opposing this bill, saying the new version of the budget reconciliation bill is a crisis for children's health care, hospitals, and providers nationwide, and we ask Congress to oppose it, as an act to support America's children. But again, I didn't really get a good answer to why Jeff Bezos needs a tax break. Ms. Moore, I want to make sure that I have this straight, because I talked about this, previously, and I couldn't believe it, but the House bill got rid of the nearly 100-year-old excise tax on gun silencers, right? But that wasn't enough for the Senate. They also got rid of the tax on sawed-off shotguns. I mean, I got to admit, I'm not much of a gun enthusiast, as some of my colleagues here might be, but I would imagine that it's easier to conceal a sawed-off shotgun or rifle, under your clothes. So Republicans are basically doubling down on what I call the hitman handout. Congresswoman Moore, am I right about that? How much would the hitman handout cost taxpayers? And can you talk about any other special interest giveaways in this bill?
Well, thank you for that question. Thank you, Mr. McGovern, for that question. The Senate got rid of the tax on sawed-off shotguns. You're absolutely correct. So there will be no tax on sawed-off shotguns.
Are there any other little giveaways that we know about, or are we going to have to wait for a few days before we find out if there are other?
Well, I think that some other things that we're seeing is that while we're cutting educational opportunity for millions of people, we do provide a tax credit for the so-called choice program that will provide tax credits to those investors that invest in non-public education. We also see that there's a special carve-out for banks certain loans that will not be taxed. Of course, we do see the protectionist movement toward fossil fuels. And
No, and I mean, I'm just saying, I think in the coming weeks, we're going to find, coming days, if this becomes law, we're going to find out more stuff. I know, Mr. Smith, I know you wanted to.
right, and of course, you remember the silencer.
Oh, yeah, no, which is, you know, like, I don't, but Mr. Smith, did you want to respond to why Jeff Bezos deserves a tax cut?
I would be happy to talk about the tax on suppressors and the short barrel rifles that you were asking.
Yeah, but that wasn't my question, but you can, you know, if you want to talk about, explain to us, people want to know, like, why does someone like Jeff Bezos need a tax cut when all this other stuff is being cut? You know, and I think that's not an outrageous question. It's what's on a lot of people's minds. By the way, not just Democrats, but independents and Republicans. That's why all the polling, that's what the polling tells us, is that people don't quite get it. But if there's a quick answer as to why Jeff Bezos or people who earn what he earns deserve a tax cut, then I'm happy to yield to you.
So I'll just say the reality is this legislation is specifically focused on delivering more jobs, permanent tax cuts, and bigger paychecks for hardworking Americans. That's why the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and the tax relief for
He just
seniors.
spent,
And
he just
Mr.
spent
McGovern.
$50 million on a wedding, and he's getting a tax cut. But whatever. But
I didn't get invited.
Mr.
Did you
McGovern,
get
I did
invited?
find the answer to your
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
The $2 billion tax cut on the sawed-off shotguns and so forth comes to about $2 billion.
Thank you. You know, the dedicated, nonpartisan civil servants at the Congressional Budget Office, you know, provide fact-based estimates on how much bills will cost the American taxpayer, how many people will gain or lose health coverage, and other important quantifiable pieces of information that all of us, I think, want to have before voting on legislation. And we should be thanking them for the work that they do, and yet Republicans vilify them now. I don't know why. Maybe because Republicans may be threatened by the facts, but I think the facts are important. We need to know how many people are going to lose their health care. We need to know how many people are going to lose their nutrition assistance. We need to know how much it's going to add to the debt. Chairman Arrington, I mean, do you agree with CBO's analysis that this bill will add $3.3 trillion to the deficit? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. As the current chair of the Budget Committee, do you agree with President Trump that CBO is, quote, run by Democrats?
I think they are mostly Democrats, and most likely they're biased in that regard
Right. Well,
philosophically.
in fact, the current director of the CBO is a Republican.
Yeah.
And that's according to a recent interview we gave with the Wall Street Journal.
That's
And
true.
do you know what you said about the current CBO director when he was reappointed to his position 2 years ago?
Probably something good, I
Yeah, you
hope.
did. You said he has the two key ingredients to faithfully execute the role as our nation's budget scorekeeper, objectivity and integrity. And then now we hear a whole different version because, you know, Republicans don't like the numbers. And it's not just CBO saying that your bill will cost trillions. It's every budget modeling organization with any credibility. Do you agree with the Yale Budget Lab that your bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth? Yes or
I
no?
probably disagree with most of what's coming out of Yale
Do you
University.
agree with the
Including that.
Penn-Wharton budget model that your bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth?
I disagree.
Do you agree with the right-leaning tax foundation that your tax cuts will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth?
I disagree with every organization you've mentioned because of a growth rate assumption.
And they account for growth. Do you agree with the right-leaning American Enterprise Institute that your bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, even when accounting for growth?
May I make a clarification? I
Yeah.
mean, you're running through a pretty good list, but I
I'm
think
almost done with it.
I think I'll let you finish.
I mean, do you agree with the Tax Policy Center that your tax cuts will
No,
add
sir.
trillions of dollars to the deficit?
I don't.
And what about the House Freedom Caucus? That these tax cuts will, they have a lower estimate, but will add over $1 trillion to the deficit and is way more expensive than the House-passed bill.
Here's my position. I don't think Democrats or Republicans have gotten serious about addressing the cumulative deficits into the future. And even when President Trump, before he put his hand on the Bible and took his oath for his second term, CBO projected $20 trillion. So they I think a lot of organizations will lump the entire $20 trillion. What I would say is, this bill is focused on the growth part of the fiscal health equation, and what we have attempted to do is make sure we don't make the deficit problem worse while reaching out to my Democrat
So
colleagues.
you would disagree with the Freedom Caucus then? Yeah, I assume that's one of the reasons why Andy Harris is voting against the rule, is because he's concerned about what this is going to add to the
I think there are a
deficit
number
debt.
of people concerned about that issue, Mr. McGovern, to be honest with you.
Yeah, in March, you said, and I quote, "If the Senate is simply using current policy to get tax cuts permanent while avoiding or skirting the responsibility to bring down spending commensurately, then that is a non-starter." That's end quote.
Yeah.
Then in our April hearing on the budget, when I asked you if you were here supporting a non-starter, you told me I opposed the notion that in the final reconciliation bill that we would have a deficit increase on the watch of a party that claims fiscal responsibility as a core principle. And as recently as June 10th, you signed a letter that said, and I quote, "We remain unequivocal in our position that any additional tax cuts must be matched dollar by real enforceable spending reductions. That union is the cornerstone of the House framework adopted in Section 4001 of H. Con. Res. 14, and it's the minimum standard for our support," end quote. So you've been very consistent in your demands, and so I have to ask you, did the Senate follow the House's reconciliation restrictions?
They did not.
All right, I mean, according to the latest analysis from the Committee on Responsible Federal Budget, the Senate violated the House's instructions by over $500 billion, and the final bill will add $4 trillion to the national debt, including interest. So here we are with a final bill that does something that you called a non-starter, that violates your core principles, and it doesn't meet what you called the minimum standard for your support. Have your core principles changed since April? I mean,
No, sir.
I mean, do words minimum and non-starter not mean what I think that they mean? Like, I don't understand, like, why, I mean, if I were on the right of this, I mean, I don't know why, you know, you wouldn't take this opportunity maybe to follow Lisa Murkowski's advice to, you know, maybe have a conference with the Senate and try to work something out. You know, it seems that everything that
You
everybody.
may be onto something.
Yeah, well, it's it. Well, and again, if that's the case, then I don't know why we're here in the Rules Committee taking up your time. But Ranking Member Boyle, it seems to me to be the prevailing view of literally every credible budget expert across the country that the Republicans' proposal will blow a multi-trillion-dollar hole in our debt. Even Republicans can't seem to get their stories straight. The Trump White House claims that the bill will reduce the deficit by trillions using magic math. Senate Republicans are opting to pretend that $4 trillion in tax cuts don't count as new tax cuts. And a select few House Republicans, like Congressman Massey, and I hate to add to his misery, Congressman Roy, actually admit that the bill will raise the deficit. Ranking Member Boyle, can you explain in very simple terms what Republicans are doing here by ignoring current law and using an alternative way to estimate the cost of their bill? And is it true that the new version of the bill adds hundreds of billions more to the deficit than what the House Republicans passed earlier this year?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member McGovern. I have to give Republicans credit for this. They have been able to get left-leaning groups and right-leaning groups both on the same side, saying exactly the same thing, that this bill adds trillions of dollars to our deficit and debt. To be specific, $4 trillion. Now, one of the ways, process-wise, that the Senate Republicans achieved this is actually truly historic. Ever since 1974, we have operated under the Budget and Impoundment Control Act. That's what created House Budget Committee, Senate Budget Committee. It's what gave birth to the Congressional Budget Office. It was to ensure that all members would have accurate numbers. The official scorekeepers, the Congressional Budget Office, would initiate 10-year projections. And within the process known as reconciliation that was created, these numbers needed to add up. If you were going to have new spending, it needed to be paid for. If you were going to give out tax cuts, that also needed to be accounted for, either through cuts or additional revenue elsewhere. Ever since 1974, we have used something called the current law baseline. So, for example, with these tax cuts, the original 2017 TCJA tax cuts, they're set to expire midnight December 31st of this year. If you want to extend them the following day, the following month, the following year, following decade, so be it, you have to pay for it. Now, because of this legislation, for the first time in 51 years, that will be violated by switching to something that's called current policy baseline. It is an intellectually bankrupt concept. Current policy baseline is jargon for essentially this concept. I bought a donut this morning. I paid for that donut. Now, tomorrow, and the next day, and every day for the rest of my life, that donut will cost me nothing. According to current policy baseline, that is true. This bill uses, make no mistake about it, current policy baseline. And again, because I'm being magnanimous, I want to give Republicans credit. You have just solved Democrats' problem and come up with the way Democrats will pay for Medicare for all. You have actually solved it by using current policy baseline. This is a new precedent that has been set, and when this bill becomes law, if it, God forbid, does become law, this will be the new standard that the Democratic side of the aisle will absolutely follow from now on.
Well, I thank you for that. Chairman Thompson, I want to go to something that Ranking Member Craig mentioned in her opening, because I think this is important. When our committee marked up this big, ugly bill in May, I recall you saying that your bill protects veterans. In fact, you actually took credit for the exemptions from work requirements for veterans, former foster youth, and homeless people that were signed into law as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And as we're here now with a bill that actually gets rid of the protections for veterans, for former foster youth, and for homeless individuals, Mr. Chairman, I know you know this, but I'll lay this out for members in this room who don't serve on the Agriculture Committee, like us, and for people watching this at home. This means if this bill gets signed into law, veterans, former foster youth ages 18 to 24, and homeless individuals will now be kicked off of their SNAP benefits after 3 months. So a 64-year-old veteran who can't find a job has nowhere left to turn. I mean, he will go hungry in 3 months. A 19-year-old girl, a 19-year-old who lived a complicated life in and out of different foster homes gets SNAP for 3 months, and then she's out of luck. A person who can't find stable housing and is trying to find a place to stay is kicked off his food benefits in 90 days. And so, you know, when we're talking about people being hurt, I mean, these are the people that we're talking about. And so my question for you, I mean, do you support removing the protections for veterans?
Well, Mr. McGovern, I'm hesitant to correct you, but my statement was President Biden was the one that was pushing those three populations of having them exempt. From what I saw, and I complained about this at this time in those negotiations, we were cheating those three populations from greater opportunity because we were not going to be able to provide them access to the SNAP employment and career and technical education benefit, which we invest significant monies on. If they can't work, as you know, being on the committee as long as what you have been, and being a champion for nutrition, which I appreciate your passion, that there's two other alternatives: is an average of 80 hours a week working, or 80 hours of volunteer work a month. I'm sorry, 80 hours a month. Yeah, of working, volunteering, or engaged in, and quite frankly, it's my favorite. I'll be honest with you. It's engaged in 80 hours of SNAP employment and career and technical education. And so just because somebody can't find a job doesn't mean their benefits stop after 3 months. They could volunteer an average of 80 hours a month and still be eligible. Or better yet, let's give them a shot at the American dream, which is not stuck in poverty. It's having access to that ladder of opportunity.
Well, I want to make sure that I'm not misquoting you here, because this is from 5/14/25, when you said, quote, "This committee, Mark, continues to exempt veterans. That was part of the negotiations I reached with President Biden during the Fiscal Responsibility Act negotiations. Our veterans are exempt from the SNAP work requirement. That is the law. We are not proposing to change the law.
Well, those
you said it.
negotiations
So now
are,
you you
negotiations are give and take. That was
Yeah.
not my position. I
Okay.
thought we were cheating those three populations. And the House version did leave them intact, given the fact that they would naturally expire on their own after just a
And
few
with respect that
few
somehow we're
years.
cheating them of opportunities, I mean,
Well,
okay.
if we're leaving them
Let me-
stuck
let me-
in
let me say-
poverty, we're cheating them.
Most states operate voluntary programs and can assign people who are interested in SNAP E&T to the program regardless of work status. These programs are severely limited.
That's right, and
Due
they
to
were
a history of
exempt under-
underfunding by both the state and the federal government. So even if you're subject to the paperwork requirements, there's no guarantee that you can participate in training because states don't have enough spaces. So this bill subjects millions of new people to the time limit in SNAP, and there aren't nearly enough E&T slots. So to put it in perspective, there were just over 300,000 E&T slots total. The demand is high. And we aren't here talking about more funding for E&T. We are here talking about you kicking more people off of benefits. And just to be honest about what you're doing, please, I think it's important to state that. I don't know, Ranking Member
Well,
Craig, whether you want to add.
Mr. Ranking
Yeah.
Member, I got to
I'm happy
say,
to- no,
I
you're-
would challenge you to say there are not plenty of volunteer opportunities in every community.
And people's lives are very complicated. In case you're not out and about in your districts, people's lives are very complicated. People don't fit into these nice, neat categories that everybody, that you all outline. That is, life doesn't fall into black and white categories. There's a lot of gray area in terms of how complicated people's lives are. Ranking Member Craig?
I would just add, Ranking Member, that these are people who've served this nation in our military, and we each know them. We know homeless veterans, we know those who are suffering with mental illness, and the idea that we are going to take food away from them in their time of need because they can't work 80 hours a month, to me, it's un-American.
Yeah, and again, I find this a particularly cruel provision in the bill. Ranking Member Craig, this bill sets up a massive new bureaucratic system forcing states to, for the first time ever, cover the cost of providing benefits to people. States have no clue how they're going to come up with the hundreds of millions of dollars to cover SNAP benefits. I mean, CBO and 23 governors wrote to us to say that states may be forced to drop out of SNAP entirely due to the increased cost. States not offering SNAP benefits to people would be catastrophic. It would make hunger exponentially worse in this country and push people deeper into poverty. And I can't even begin to guess what kind of long-term consequences that would have on healthcare costs, workplace productivity, and educational outcomes. So you don't have to take my word for it. We had 23 governors write to Congress, and they said, quote, if states are forced to end their SNAP programs, hunger and poverty will increase, child and adults will get sicker, grocery stores in rural areas will struggle to stay open, people in agriculture and in the food industry will lose their jobs, and state and local economies will suffer, end quote. I ask unanimous consent to insert their letter into the record. Yeah, and in some states, I know Minnesota is one of them, and you mentioned this. And by the way, Mr. Pallone and Ms. Moore, New Jersey and Wisconsin are also on that list. Counties will be on the hook for a portion of that cost. In Minnesota, I think counties will be on the hook for coming up with $43 million per year to continue offering benefits. I know you do your homework, Ms. Craig, and I know you talked to county officials about this. Do county officials in Minnesota have confidence that they can come up with $43 million a year? And if they can't, then what happens?
No, Mr. Ranking Member, they do not. In fact, those county commissioners in Minnesota have been burning up my cell phone all weekend long. States already have skin in the game. 50% of the cost share for administering SNAP goes to the states. And in some states, that cost is even higher. In Minnesota, for example, the cost of administering SNAP, mostly, it's about 80%, falls on the counties. And this bill shifts more of the cost for federal food assistance programs onto them. I've heard from a bunch of them in the last 24 hours, and today, the Minnesota Star Tribune, the headline, front page, was Trump's federal spending bill could force Minnesota counties to raise property taxes. realistically, Mr. Ranking Member, the only thing that those Minnesota counties are going to be able to do with this unfunded mandate is either raise local taxes, county property taxes, or they're going to have to not fund other priorities in the county.
So this could end up being a tax increase at the state level or at the county level, I mean, in order to be able to make sure that people have the basic necessity of food.
Yeah, for many Minnesotans, the tax increase at the local level is going to just completely offset. It's going to be much, much more than the tiny little tax decrease that some of the folks here are suggesting people may end up with. Look, it's a lose-lose for Minnesotans, but, you know, Virginia, New Jersey, the members on this committee, the Rules Committee, and I would suspect a lot of the folks here, Mr. McGovern, don't actually know about this yet, or you've only learned about it in recent days. Colorado, Ohio, and in particular, North Carolina and New Jersey, where counties pay actually 100% of the administrative cost. In fact, I have a statement here from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners that was issued last week that I'd like to read because I think it should be incredibly important to members of the Rules Committee across the aisle. By reducing federal funding and shifting administrative costs to state and local governments, Congress would force North Carolina and its counties to replace tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue, either by generating new funds through increased taxes or redirecting them from other essential programs. Should the state be unwilling or unable to replace the SNAP benefit reductions, individual counties will be forced to choose between diverting funding from their own programs, raising local taxes, or watching their residents go without this important safety net. Local governments are most disadvantaged to replace SNAP funding. The best way to ensure our residents receive this benefit is to preserve federal funding. It's just really, truly difficult, Mr. McGovern, to see how the people in this room could support a bill that is going to increase taxes at the county level on so many of the states across this country.
And I think this is a big deal. It's a big change. And I do think this should have been the subject of hearings, and we should have heard from people from all around the country as to how they would potentially deal with it or not deal with it, and what the impact would be. I mean, the cynic in me says that maybe part of the deal is to get states to opt out of SNAP and to not provide people a food benefit and just take that off the table. You know, but this is going to have an impact that I think most states don't even have a clue of, right, of what it's going to mean to them. Yeah.
If I may, Mr.
Sure.
Governor, the CBO scores that you quoted, that was actually when there was state share, that was scored at a state share of 50%.
Well, that was,
Which
your
was
bill, yeah.
which is outrageous. And of course, the Senate made some refinements to the process. Any error rates under 6% is a zero cost share. The idea here is not to punish anyone, it's to incentivize the states to do a better job.
And
Because
understand
it's
too
the
that error rates
the
include
recip-
underpayments for people. Yeah.
Well, underpayments or
yeah, but-
overpayments, because overpayments get clawed back, and that hurts people in future months.
I would encourage us all to read what actually came back from the Senate, because in fact, 10 states in this country are not going to be subject to the cost shift that others are as a result of a last-minute deal cut over in the Senate by one U.S. senator. And for that matter, I just say last night, the governor of Pennsylvania warned that his state, your state here, some of you here, might
had
have to
abusive
opt
numbers.
out of the program, leaving 2 million people without federal food assistance if these cuts become law. The consequences for that are health, our rates of childhood obesity, of hunger for economy. It would be devastating if this happens.
Let me just, one quick question. Are undocumented immigrants in SNAP?
No, of course they aren't, by federal law. And look, every member of this committee should just go on their phone. I know you all know how to use a phone. The USDA website clearly states, this is a direct quote, SNAP is not and has never been available to undocumented non-citizens. Only American citizens and certain other select groups of documented, that means they're in this country legally, non-citizens may receive SNAP. It's embarrassing that any
No,
member of Congress would actually
No,
say
but I
that.
thank you for saying that, because I've heard some of my Republican colleagues on talk shows talking about that.
They aren't, and they never
I don't
have
know
been.
what they're talking about. I just have one last set of questions for Energy and Commerce. Mr. Guthrie, President Trump has said time and time and again, and and in fact, he continues to say that Republicans will not touch Medicaid. But, which is, it blows my mind that he says that, but anyway, but if Republicans enact this bill, you will be in clear and total violation of that promise. This bill, as I read it, includes $930 billion in cuts to Medicaid. That's according to the nonpartisan budget scorekeepers at CBO. But just don't take it from me, or even from the budget experts. Listen to the doctors and the hospitals across the country that say this bill will devastate healthcare in this country. The Children's Hospital Association said, and I quote, "The new version of the budget reconciliation bill is a crisis for children's health care, hospitals, and providers nationwide, and we ask Congress to oppose it as an act of support for America's children. Your child, regardless of their insurance status, could see the services they rely on reduced or eliminated with significantly less support to sustain them. The bill amounts to fewer doctors and nurses to see your child, longer wait times, and sicker children," end quote. Hospitals across the country have raised alarms, including in Louisiana, Ohio, and in your home state of Kentucky. On June 26, the Kentucky Hospital Association said that this bill will force hospitals to close and endanger 20,000 healthcare jobs in your state. In total, estimates suggest that more than 300 rural hospitals and over 500 nursing homes could close because of this legislation. The fact that this bill cuts Medicaid has even been confirmed by key Republicans, including Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, the Chairwoman Fox's home state, who asked, quote, "What do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore?" So, Chairman Guthrie, can you answer that question? Like, what should Senator Tillis tell the hundreds of thousands of people in North Carolina who will be pushed off of Medicaid because of the cuts in funding? And what about the 40,000 people in my district in Massachusetts who will lose their health care? I mean, you think that they deserve to know why cutting these benefits is such a priority, and especially because the offsets are being used, again, not to reduce the deficit or the debt, but to pay for tax cuts for very wealthy people.
Yeah, let me start with, as we were here before, the people who were losing their health insurance on the Medicaid side of it, the people who were most affected, one, were illegal. There are people that are illegal that receive Medicaid benefits through states that choose to do that.
Yeah,
That
not
was,
federal-
that was,
not
that was
federal
birded out of the bill, so that's not part of it.
Right.
So you got the most.
But never federal Medicaid.
Well, there's two ways to do it. One is they use the federal office that's 90/10, whatever you want to call it, to administer it. So that's what we were looking at, is the administration costs. The other thing is you don't have to verify legal status until 90 days into being on Medicaid. So there's people technically be on Medicaid, and it's scored, so there's no, that it happens with CBO. And that was not allowed in by the Byrd rule. So the other is people that are not eligible because of eligibility rules, and the people that are able to work. It was 4.6 million. That number is of people who were estimated that were able to work. And when we say able to work, it's people all the ones that you talked about with mental health, with all the other, they're exempted out, people with substance use disorder.
Well, according to the Joint Economic Committee, 184,526 people will lose their health care coverage in Kentucky. Are they all deserving to lose their health care benefits?
So I would say if they're able to work and choose not to work, when I say under the restrictions that we have for eligibility, most Kentuckians think, I know there was some criticism that came out from the governor's office of our bill, but if they're defending people that are able to work
That's an
and
awful
they're
lot
not
of people- That's
working.
an awful lot of people in Kentucky. Ranking Member
Well,
Peralman-
Kentucky has one of the lowest workforce participation rates, people who are eligible to work that are working, and they'll be better off if they're working.
Yeah, I want to make just one statement before I go to Mr. Colon. This notion that, all these millions and millions of Americans really are living the easy life, staying home watching TV and being on Medicaid and being on SNAP is ludicrous. A food benefit that's on average $2 per meal for an individual. I mean, it's just like, it's so offensive to people in this country. And, I don't know whether you talk to your constituents who are on Medicaid, but I'll tell you, their lives are oftentimes very, very complicated. And I think part of why this bill is so unpopular is because people think you're talking about them.
I agree that people have complicated lives. Not everybody you said it, not everybody fits into a neat category. But it doesn't make sense to let people there are a substantial number, according to studies, of people that are receiving Medicaid that could otherwise be working. That's why we were very careful to sculpt provisions where people that are on substance use disorder,
Right.
people that are mental health, they're all exempted. People with
Look,
dependent child at home.
Living through the last 24 hours and watching the machinations of the United States Senate trying to add things, take things out, move things around, using the words "very careful" don't seem to apply here. And I'm willing to bet you anything that if this thing becomes law, you'll find out in a few days that there's something in here that none of us knew was in there, or that has an adverse impact on something that we care about, and it's going to be too late to do anything about it. So I'm just telling you, this was not a very careful process. We don't know all of the implications about what is coming before
Well,
us
the
today.
eligibility requirements from the House have stood, and those were very carefully drafted because of the points you made.
So Ranking Member Pallone, Republicans continue to falsely claim that the only people who will lose health insurance will be undocumented people or people who sit at home watching TV all day. Can you address this point and discuss who will lose health care under this bill, who is actually losing health coverage, and why do they need Medicaid and the ACA?
Well, let me divide the answer in two parts. One is about the people that lose their health insurance, and the second is about the cuts to providers and the children's hospitals and the other things you mentioned. First of all, the Republicans have to stop, I know they won't, but they have to stop saying that the only thing they're doing here is work requirements or paperwork. The bottom line is that if you talk about the $1 trillion that's going to be cut here, or the 17 million people that are going to lose their health insurance, there's probably only a third of that $1 trillion that's related to the paperwork. Now, that's significant because the bottom line is that, it's not fair. Use the Georgia example I've used a million times, where they estimated there were 300,000 or 400,000 people that were eligible for Medicaid expansion, and only 4,500 of those actually got Medicaid because of the paperwork requirements, meaning, you've got to file every month. You have to show that if you're not working, it's, because of a level of disability that's impossible to reach. That's maybe a third of it. The rest of it is all the other cuts, right? So, for example, with regard to the ACA, the subsidies, the enhanced subsidies are gone. So if your health insurance costs you, is valued at, say, $5,200 a year, and you're paying $100 a month, you're now going to have to pay an extra $4,000 that would have been subsidized, and you can't afford it, so therefore you don't get health insurance, right? So this is not primarily about paperwork requirements, although those paperwork requirements are so awful that a lot of people will lose their health insurance. The other thing I was going to say too is that you're talking about the Children's Hospital. This is what the Senate did that made this so much more onerous. We don't talk about CHIP, right? Much. You haven't heard much about that. But what's been done collectively between the House and the Senate with CHIP is devastating, right? So now there are lifetime and annual limits on how much can be spent for a child on CHIP. There are provisions that say that you have to wait 30 days before you're eligible for CHIP. So the children's hospitals are devastated, in part, not only because of Medicaid and the ACA cuts, but also because of the impact on CHIP. And then what the Senate did with the provider tax was even worse, because you understand that there's two things here that hospitals depend on. If they're failing, a state like New Jersey will give them what we call direct state payments so that they don't fail. Those are significantly cut back in the House and the Senate bill. The provider tax, if you say in the House bill, we said, well, we're going to just keep the provider tax the way it is. You can't raise it due to inflation. You can't change it any other way. But they didn't change the status quo. What the Senate did is to scale back and say every year the provider tax is going to be less and less. And then if you don't get that provider tax at the state level, then you can't give the providers, in this case the hospitals and nursing homes, the level of money so that they can actually operate. So look, I don't want to eliminate the emphasis on the paperwork or whatever the Republicans call it, the work requirements. That's devastating enough. But you have to understand that that's a certain percentage of this overall cuts. It's not the majority. A lot of this is just directly cutting these programs and the amount of funding that's coming to the providers.
Right.
That's what's going on here.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie, are you aware how much damage this bill is going to do to the clean energy industry in Kentucky? I mean, I have a letter here addressed to you from manufacturing companies in Kentucky, and the letter states, quote, "There are already more than 14,000 clean energy jobs in Kentucky in the battery, manufacturing, automotive, grid infrastructure, critical minerals, and clean energy industries," end quote. The letter further states that $8 billion in announced funding for these industries to your state has yet to be spent and is at significant risk if this bill passed. That sounds like a heck of a lot of jobs. I mean, what do you say to these employers? And and I mean, I mean, on the tax portion of this bill, I mean, what do you tell the thousands of people who could lose their jobs from Kentucky, or for that matter,
Well-
in Missouri? I mean, who want to work in these high-paying industries? I mean,
Well-
this bill is a job killer and a climate killer.
If they're the largest battery plants are in my district, one battery plant, Ford offers a good product people are going to buy. They were going to build 2 battery plants in my district. They built 2 plants. They're going to equip one because they make a good product and people are going to buy it. They're not going to equip the other. They're looking for other uses for it. The other one is actually in my hometown. And I say this, and I've told people who've asked me about this, I think if people choose to buy an electric vehicle, that's absolutely their choice. I don't think it's the federal government's job to mandate them to do so. And I think it's better off for the American people, regardless of what the specific issues. But I think people are going to end up buying these cars because they're good products. But I don't think that they should be mandated. I just don't think they should be mandated to be bought.
Yeah, well,
Mr.
Yes.
McGovern, our clocks have gone wonky on us. We've now been going about 40 minutes.
no, and I
And I think that's really testing.
No, and I appreciate the chairwoman's admonition, but with all due respect to everybody who's here, I mean, this is a big deal, and we don't even have time to read everything in this bill, and for many of us who have looked at the House bill and tried to follow what's going on in the Senate, we are really worried about how it's going to impact our constituents, and so I get it, but we have no other opportunity to be able to ask these questions and get these answers. And so, again, I apologize to the panel, but this is important, and I will.
Can I finish my thought, though?
Oh, yeah,
But-
yeah, okay.
But if I was a business and my member of Congress was not going to mandate that people buy my product,
But they're not
I might send them a letter as well.
We're not mandating you to buy a product.
Well, they're mandating you have
No,
to
we're
buy
not.
electric.
We're actually trying to get an industry off the ground and maybe provide a little help in combating climate change and actually being good to this planet. Yeah, and, so anyway, I think people would rather that than tax cuts for Jeff Bezos. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to take 5 seconds. We've heard mention of people who are on SNAP and on welfare having complicated lives. Let me tell you, the most complicated lives of the people in this country who are working 40-plus hours a week to pay their taxes and deal with their children and health care and other things. I don't hear too many people defending
Well,
those people.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, the majority of able-bodied adults on SNAP work for a living. And the majority of people on the program are children and they're senior citizens. So let's not leave the misimpression that, that program is just for people who don't work.
Mr. Norman?
I want to thank all the committee heads, Chairman, for what you've done. The first bill that we put out, each of you worked hard to get. Each of you had things and were part of the process. Our Democrat colleagues, no one voted for our bill that the House sent over. No one agrees with giving money back to the taxpayer that they earned. And to have my good friend, Mr. McGovern, question whether there were really people who are able-bodied, and it's not that many of them, you hadn't been in the real world. You go to that restaurant, you go to that electrician, you go to that tire manufacturer, Every day, the number one concern is getting people who are willing to do hot work. It's not there. You've been in government too long. And all I would say is that the founders and the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence would be astounded that we're sitting here talking about something that we hadn't read fully. We hadn't got a copy of it. Now, Mr. McGovern, I do agree with you on that, the fact that we should have it in hand. I think the founders and the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence would be astounded that we're adding debt to our children and grandchildren who are defenseless. Debt is a curse. And Jody, you were right. We got to reverse the curse. And what the Senate did is unconscionable. What they did to our bill was unconscionable. And that's why, I will be, unlike my Democrat colleagues, they will not support anything their new leader in New York, Mamdani, government-run stores, government-run gas stations, government-run apartments. I wonder how many U-Haulets are now leaving New York, and the socialist theory just does not work. So I'm against this because of what the Senate did. I'll vote against it here, and I'll vote against it on the floor until we get it right. And the fact is, the good news, we're going to pass the tax cuts. The tax cuts don't expire until the December of this year. We're going to pass the tax cuts. And I think we're going to go back to the drawing table. It is my hope we'll go back to the drawing table and get very close to what we sent the Senate, because instead of each individual senator getting a goodie bag and sacrificing the health of this country is an abomination to, again, the founders and the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. So I do think that hopefully we'll get to that. We're not there yet, but I think hopefully we will be, and the American people will be better off for it. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Yes, I'd first yield to Mr. McGovern.
No, the gentleman just took a swipe at me. Let me return a swipe by saying I think he spent too much time at Mar-a-Lago and with people who are well-off and well-connected. He needs to spend a little bit more time talking to people who are struggling in this country. And by the way, I think we just have another announcement of somebody who's opposed to the bill. Are you opposed to the rule, too?
Yes, I'm going to vote against the rule, and I'm going to vote against.
So that's three. If we get one more, then then we're done for today, and you can go and work out something different. So I don't know why we're here if we already know three people who are going to vote against the rule. We're not even get this thing to the floor unless you cave, which has become a kind of a pattern around here. But I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Yeah, it's interesting how many qualms we're hearing from across the aisle, whether the Senate or the senators. Yes, it is. Whether it's senators or members of the House who don't think this bill is ready to go. I couldn't agree more. I think it's the most expensive bill in the history of our nation. I had a town hall this weekend. My constituents have questions about it. I've got a lot of questions about it. All the reports we're seeing come out have that it's the biggest wealth transfer in our nation's history. It's the largest effort to kick people off their health care and nutrition assistance that's going to have kids going hungry and also without health care. So I think it's a monstrosity. I don't think it's defensible either morally or economically. It's supposed to reduce the national debt, and it adds trillions to the national debt. That's because the real purpose is not debt reduction. I think it's pretty clear. The real purpose is to give tax cuts to billionaires and big business in service to this failed economic theory of trickle-down economics, which has proven over half a century to never spur the kind of economic growth to make up for the deficits that tax cuts for billionaires create. If Republicans run through these tax cuts, our economy will not magically overperform to make up the lost revenue. It just doesn't work that way. But we will see even more income inequality as the rich, the Musks, the Bezos, the Mar-a-Lago millionaires get richer and everybody else gets left behind. Some of our colleagues say they hate this bill or they don't like parts of it, but at the end of the day, they have lacked the guts to stand up for the American people, and they have voted for this travesty of a bill over and over again because the head of their party wants it. Time and again, we've seen the only Republicans willing to stand up for their constituents in the country are those who are on their way out the door. So what kind of moral compass does one need to have to think that a millionaire deserves a tax cut, but a working mom should lose her health care? As Ranking Member Moore suggested, our bills, our budgets make clear what our priorities are. And what's clear here is that Trump's Republican Party only cares about rich people and large companies. They don't care about working people. They don't care about kids. They don't care if you need Medicare or SNAP to make ends meet. This bill is an unconscionable attack on the middle class and on our poorest American neighbors. It's a 940-page testament to Republican values, and those values are grim. It's really shocking to see the supporters of this bill trying to justify taking away health care from 17 million people, kicking 5 million people off SNAP, causing the closure of hundreds of nursing homes, community health centers, and hospitals across the country, allowing mining and oil drilling on our public lands and in our public forests, raising energy costs for consumers across the country, while adding nearly $4 trillion to the national debt so that the mega rich can get mega richer. Who in their right minds thinks this is a good deal for the American people? For every millionaire that gets a tax cut, 19 people would be kicked off their health care and 6 people will lose their food assistance. I don't think these measures reflect the values of the hardworking families that I represent in Pennsylvania's 5th. And I don't think it's what most Americans want now that we have the details in writing. And that's why I think this hearing is particularly important, as this bill has been constructed over the weekend with last-minute additions, in, they're out. We all need to be reading this bill and not after taking the votes. This bill puts the government's weight entirely on the side of the wealthy and well-connected. It values caviar over kids. It values hedge funds over health care, and it values Mar-a-Lago over the middle class. The health care cuts alone in this bill are breathtaking. Medicaid, a program that ensures over 90 million Americans, including almost half of all the births in this country, is on the chopping block. The bill slashes state funding, imposing work requirements and paperwork traps, and repealing incentives to expand Medicaid altogether. And the Republican justification for these Medicaid cuts is bull. As we have heard, as anyone who's looked at it knows, federal Medicaid does not cover undocumented immigrants. But it does cover millions of children, including 99% of all foster kids, which I know is a particular concern for Rep. Moore, almost half the births in this country, and 1/3 of all kids with cancer. And that's whose health care coverage is being threatened by this bill. The work requirements are a particularly cruel hoax. They don't increase employment, they just increase the red tape. And I thought our Republican colleagues were against bureaucracy and red tape. When Arkansas tried similar work requirements, over 18,000 people lost coverage, and there was no increase in employment. This bill mandates similar complicated paperwork requirements so that a Medicaid recipient has to prove they're doing 80 hours a month of work or community engagement, even though the vast majority of folks on Medicaid are already working, in school, or caring for a family member. So even though most Medicaid recipients are working, if they forget to file a form, if they miss a verification deadline, if their employer fails to respond, or if their state agency makes a mistake, they get kicked off Medicaid. It's not that they're not eligible, it's that the paperwork gets them kicked off. It's a cruel bureaucratic paperwork trap, not a work incentive. And that's why the CBO found that these policies won't increase employment, but they will cause millions to lose their coverage. When people lose coverage, their illnesses don't disappear, their needs don't go away. They go to the emergency room, they delay care until it becomes catastrophic, they miss bills, they lose their homes to pay for treatment. Ultimately, people will die due to the loss of coverage. That's the real-world impact of this bill. But many of our Republican colleagues don't seem to get that. Mitch McConnell said people will get over it. Joni Ernst said, and I quote, "We're all going to die." And today, in this meeting, we're hearing statements that show an unfathomable callousness towards the American people who are going to lose their coverage. I had at my town hall meeting this weekend parents of kids with disabilities who overwhelmingly rely on this coverage. And the idea that they could navigate caps on coverage for their kids is simply astonishing. Plus, we're hearing from every corner that the Medicaid cuts are going to cost hundreds of nursing homes. We've got a list now of 537 nursing homes that are at risk of closing. One's in my district, 2 are adjoining. This is going to cause nursing homes, hospitals, and community health centers to close. It is really mind-boggling. We know that more than 60% of long-term care residents rely on Medicaid. But this bill cuts that funding while simultaneously eliminating staffing requirements at our long-term care facilities. So people aren't going to be able to afford the care, and the care they get isn't going to be as good as it is now. That's a recipe for disaster. We're going to see facilities shutting down and horror stories of abuse, neglect, and poor conditions. Then there's the gutting of food assistance. The bill imposes harsh new work requirements for SNAP that would kick millions off the program, including, as we've heard, families, seniors, veterans, and foster youth. It turns LIHEAP assistance into countable income. And for many of our communities, like Chairman Thompson's community, mine, LIHEAP is absolutely essential for people trying to get through the winter. It bans using internet bills in utility and allowances, and that's an especially egregious cut in the 21st century. On top of that, states are going to have to start footing part of the SNAP bill for the first time ever. This is a backdoor cut, and I know my state, as well as I assume many of the others, are not prepared to take that hit to their budgets. Like so many provisions in this bill, the SNAP provisions would shift billions of dollars in cost to the states, in addition to all the paperwork and personnel costs that this bill would add. For example, when you no longer have automatic registration for school lunches because you have untied it from SNAP, all of a sudden, all of our local school districts are going to have to re-engage with an arduous process to make sure that kids are eligible for school lunches. We had a roundtable with our local school districts a couple weeks ago, and they are terrified about this at a time when school budgets are under so much stress. All of a sudden, we're going to require them to hire dozens of new people to make sure kids can get lunches and be able to study while they're at school because their stomachs aren't growling. Multiple analyses have shown that any minimal benefit that we might get from this tax structure for lower-income Americans is going to get eaten up by Trump's tariff wars. According to a new economic analysis put out yesterday by the Yale Budget Lab, this bill is actually going to reduce income for the bottom 40% of earners. A massive chunk of the middle class will actually see their incomes drop as a result of this bill. Meanwhile, people at the top 1% are going to get a $30,000 tax cut, and the top 0.01%, will get a $100,000 handout. So again, every responsible study that is looking at this is showing that we're going to see a wealth transfer from low-income Americans to the wealthiest among us. And all of this is going to be paid for with borrowed money. The bill adds nearly $4 trillion to the debt. That's not me saying it. It's Moody's, the Wall Street Journal, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. It's going to be the single largest increase to the deficit in American history. Republicans say the tax cuts will pay for themselves. It's a lie. It always has been. It was a lie in 1981, it was a lie in 2001, and it was a lie in 2017. It's still a lie today. The promise of tax cuts for the rich creating jobs and economic growth has never materialized, and we have the data of half a century to show that. What we have witnessed is a massive increase in income inequality, an acceleration of corporate concentration, stagnant wages for workers, jobs shipped overseas, and an economy that doesn't revolve around Main Street, but around shareholders, Wall Street, and CEOs. The climate provisions in this big ugly bill are no better. It represents a near total rollback of the historic investments in clean energy and environmental protection that we enacted in the Inflation Reduction Act. These cuts are going to jeopardize 1.75 million good-paying construction jobs and billions of dollars in private sector investment that is growing our economy now with solar, wind, and hydroelectric projects. We're slamming the brakes with this bill on some incredible economic growth and ceding energy dominance to China. Also, our Republican colleagues can placate their fossil fuel donors. This bill is a brazen handout to polluters. It has sweetheart deals for the oil, coal, and gas industries that read like they were written by lobbyists. It mandates lease sales in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, threatening one of the last truly pristine ecosystems on Earth. It opens 4 million acres of public land to coal mining and slashes royalty rates, a direct subsidy to the oil and gas industry. And household energy costs are going to go up as a result of this bill. We've seen 2 studies already showing that costs for energy in my state, in Pennsylvania, in New York, are likely to increase 7 to 8%. In Minnesota, they're likely to increase by 12%, and 16% increase in energy costs for Texas and South Carolina. This bill not only repeals clean energy tax credits for wind and solar, but imposes a steep excise tax on any new wind or solar project that doesn't comply with restrictions that are designed to be impossible to meet. This is a particular burden on Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania's legislature recently passed a law to help our schools convert to solar energy, using some of the credits in the Inflation Reduction Act. And this was viewed as a win-win-win-win because it was good for our construction folks, it was good for our school districts because it was lowering their costs of construction and of energy costs moving forward, and of course it was good for folks who are concerned about the environment. So it was a broadly bipartisan bill. That we now have school districts that have signed up to get the benefits of that and to use solar as they undertake needed renovations in our schools. And now that's all put on hold because of this bill. You know, we've seen the bill's going to gut tax incentives for clean vehicles and for purchasing energy-efficient appliances. For the last year, my office has been holding seminars for consumers so they know how to claim these tax credits. You know, folks, if you want an electric car under this bill, you better buy it before September because it's cutting it off that quickly. The bill also slashes funding for environmental justice initiatives that we're finally beginning to address decades of pollution and disinvestment in frontline communities. And I have many of those in my district, places that are subject to flooding and other environmental harm because they were redlined, because they haven't had the help to address those things. The bill's not just bad for the environment, it's a deliberate, coordinated attempt to reverse our progress on the climate crisis. It's going to cost us jobs, it's going to cost us economic growth, and it's going to cost us leadership in the global clean energy race. Some of us were involved in a roundtable with folks from the UK last week, and one of their business leaders said, wow, you know, Europe and the UK were really ahead of the curve when it comes to clean energy investment and innovation, but then the US passed that Inflation Reduction Act, and if you heard a giant sucking sound, it was all the investment coming out of Europe and going to the US. But they said, but now we don't know because there's too much uncertainty. It looks like you're going to roll that back, and we're probably not going to invest in the US again. So, you know, this is a multi-billion-dollar gift to the most polluting industries on the planet. It is a betrayal of future generations. And when you add the environmental harm to the harm of adding $4 trillion to the deficit, it's a betrayal of our kids. So we've also got issues of the money that's being added to the budget in this bill, especially around immigration, the dollars that are being sent to private prison contracting companies, billions of dollars. We know that they're supporting this administration in its claims that they're only going after the worst of the worst, but certainly the scenes that we're seeing on the ground are telling a completely different story. We've seen masked agents grabbing hardworking people, not hardened criminals, but people with no criminal past from their workplaces, from court appearances. The administration has ripped families apart, detaining grandmas and landscapers without notice and without any information about where they're being held, including disappearing people to countries they've never been to based on tattoos. U.S. citizens have been mistakenly arrested, and we're on track to see more deaths in ICE custody since that information started being publicly reported in 2018. You know, the reality is it's not the worst of the worst. According to a recent report from the very conservative Cato Institute, 65% of the people taken by ICE have had no convictions whatsoever. Clearly, this ICE, et cetera, is not deporting the worst of the worst. They're just trying to meet Stephen Miller's quotas, no matter who gets hurt in the process. So, you know, in addition, we have concerns that this is being done at the expense of legitimate national security and crime-fighting efforts. What we're seeing on our streets is dystopian, it's un-American, and people, including U.S. citizens, are scared of their own government, which is not something I ever thought I'd be saying, and it's really horrific to see. But Americans understand that when an immigrant is denied due process, it's a slippery slope for everyone. Because if the government doesn't have to prove whether someone's a citizen or